Hello there, I am Janine Turner, and welcome to Northern Disclosure, where Rob Morrow and I co-host the rewatch podcast of 110 episodes of Northern Exposure. And I don't know, I'm having a blast. So thanks, because we watched them. And so now we're on episode, is this 6, 7? What is it, Rob? Hello, Rob.
Hello there, Janine. I'm so glad to see you again, looking beautiful with yet another hair color.
Too.
I don't know. I think you're running out of options. Next week, I expect you to be totally black hair.
Okay. But also, I'm thinking, how do I come up with 110 different looks?
I know. That's going to be tough. But this episode is number 6, and it's called Sex, Lies, and Ed's Tapes. It's a great episode.
It is a great episode. It is a wonderful episode. And we have a special guest, everyone. Drum roll, please. We have Darren Burrows, and he's going to be popping in here in about 8 or so minutes. But this is where Rob and I have our little moment to talk about the episode. And Rob, you're looking wonderful and young as always.
Well, Thank you.
And that's one of the things when I was watching this show, Jim Heyman, this was probably my favorite lighting show. I thought and finally I got some light on my face. I think around this episode, Jim realized I might be important to the series.
Oh, I think everyone knew that from the get-go.
I don't know. But I finally have some light on my face. But I love the lighting at the end with Marilyn, and the lighting was really wonderful. But one of the things that strikes me, Rob, is how young we all looked. So innocent. And there's an innocence to the show, don't you think? Everyone was just so innocent in this show. And I have my little list, which I do want to run down very quickly, of favorite lines. But does innocence struck me and how young we all looked? Absolutely.
It's amazing. And it's amazing, and it'll be interesting to speak to Darren about this, because I remember those early that first season when we were all kind of hanging out together, and we didn't know, we weren't famous, we weren't rich, we were just there doing what we loved in this place, in this beautiful place. And I see that, sometimes when I'm watching the show like this, when I was watching Sex, Lies, and Ed's Tapes last night, it's just, I end up thinking about what was going on when we were making it, not so much the story, but, oh yeah, I remember so-and-so bought a car, or so-and-so had a baby or whatever. So
as opposed to when you and I used to watch it, you and I were always, man, I hate the way they cut it off my face at that pivotal moment.
Right.
I saw dailies and I had such better work, and they didn't choose any of it. That's how we look at it in the beginning.
It's true, right? But now it's not. What's nice now is having the perspective and seeing what was without having the distance somehow gets the ego out of it and lets us just appreciate it. I know I'm enjoying watching these episodes.
Right back at you, because, I think life gets, when you hit your 60s, at least for me, sometimes my mother's living with me, and God bless her. And, a lot of things in life sort of weigh you down. And when I watch this show, I just feel happy for that hour. I just feel happy, and I'm smiling, and I don't even have to be on screen. I'm enjoying everybody else's storylines, the work that everybody else is doing, the brilliance of the writing. And it really is a place where you can go and just feel happy. Okay, here are my few notes. All right, you with me, Rob?
I'm with you, Janine.
I do this every episode. I think this will be like our regular gig. Here's some of my favorite lines. First of all, I thought Darren is always amazing, and we'll talk to Darren. This was Ed's establishment of his Woody Allen, which I love, and we'll talk to him about that. John Cullum, I thought, was also superb in this episode. We really got to see his simplicity. But what's
that's
the
a good way
name?
To put it. His simplicity. He had a great simplicity. It wasn't simple, but it was the simplicity of it allowed you in, right?
The honesty of it. He was just simple and honest. And what's the actor's name, Rob? That played Cynthia's boyfriend?
Brandon Douglas.
Brandon Douglas. I wonder what he's been doing. He was also really good. So here's some of my favorite lines. Brandon Douglas, who's he comes into town, ends up he's Shelley's husband, and nobody knows about it. And he says, "My wife, your baby." Right. And he says, "World's going to hell in a handbasket." I thought that was really funny. I also thought it was funny when this young 20-year-old kid said, "I'm getting a gut. I need light beer." Rick and his tumor, and how Maggie, this defensiveness that she thought she was killing another boyfriend. That was a very humorous
And it was
sideline.
so, what I loved about your work there, Janine, was, it was, you could really see that you were defensive. Clearly, you're defensive because you're concerned, like maybe the curse is real. But what was beautiful about it was how hurt you are underneath that. You're just this little girl who's hurt with, what if I actually do have a curse, and it's so clear. It's so moving because I can just see that pain in your face. It was beautifully played.
Oh, thank you, Rob. Because you know how every rewatch podcast, I talk about how wonderful your work is. Oh my
Well,
God. And we'll get to
thanks.
that. We'll get to that because your Dustin Hoffman impersonation was wonderful. But thank you for that. That was my method acting coming into play.
Yeah.
That was my, sensory, multi-layered. I worked at that. I really worked hard on that. But I love Maggie's line when she says to Rick, he goes, maybe I'm going to die. And she looks at him and she goes, you're not that special.
I wrote that one down too.
Okay. Okay, we'll get to this with.
But
with
what's
Darren
revealing about that line, though, is like, it's like, okay, here she, that's what show, and that's where her and Fleischman are so similar. It's like just when they have something what they want, like it's all okay, they undercut it, because it was so mean. It's like, you're not that special. It's like,
I know. Yeah, but that's life, isn't it? We get there and then we pull the rug out sometimes.
Yeah,
all
absolutely.
played with sincerity. We'll talk more about. I want to get through my list and not take a lot of time. Indiana Jones, that whole Indiana Jones thing,
So
was
cool.
And the fact that they used sex lies, Ed's imagination to get there was very clever in the writing, I thought.
But we should also say that the title "Sex Lies and Ed's Tape" comes from Steven Soderbergh's movie "Sex Lies and Videotape," which had just come out a year or so before, or that year,
Right.
and was a big phenomenon in the indie film movement. And so, the thing about Northern, especially in this episode, is the cultural references from Sex Lies and Videotape to Raiders in the Lost Ark to Midnight Cowboy. It's fascinating how they were able to get a lot of references, cultural references in. We talked about Twin Peaks last week.
Mm-hmm. And I texted Josh Brand this morning just how the way they interwove the brilliance of all these things and used Ed to bring in all these things. And by the way, I have a very interesting story about John Schlesinger, who directed Midnight Cowboy. There was a quote that I'd read in Variety, Hollywood Reporter, I don't know where, and it said, it asked him, how do you deal with Hollywood? And he said, you have to remain tremendously strong about what you know you can do and never take no for an answer. And I cut that out and I put it in my billfold and I carried it with me when I was a struggling actress for years. And do you know, recently I found it.
Amazing.
Yeah, I found it. So thank you, John Schlesinger, for that.
I got to hang out with him one night and had he was such a fascinating, he was so inspirational to me as a filmmaker, but spending time with him and hearing him talk about, basically talking about how he was able to withstand the slings and arrows of Hollywood was a great lesson. I'll share with you sometime off the air.
I think everyone would love to hear that. But Rob, your Dustin Hoffman impersonation was brilliant.
Thanks.
Yeah, that was really good. And instead of I'm walking here, what was it?
So we should say that Ed is having writer's block in this episode, and it's the main story of the episode, I think. And so he starts so I tell him he should write what he knows, and he starts daydreaming about what he knows, and he's picturing Joel Fleischman and Chris Stevens walking down the street, and all of a sudden his mind takes him to this fantasy of Midnight Cowboy, and it was as if so John and I, Corbett is as Joe Buck, the John Voight part, and me as Dustin Hoffman, inhabit those parts, but it's on the street of Sicily, but we're doing the dialogue from a famous scene where Dustin says, I'm walking here. But
you said something different. You didn't say walking.
Said, I'm talking here. I'm talking here.
And weren't the sets amazing?
Amazing.
The intricacy of even the earlier one with Indiana Jones, I thought the sets were amazing.
So good. Woody Crocker, once again, we can't sing his praises enough. He was the production designer and just always, and he had to do it on a shoestring budget, especially in the beginning, and do it fast. I mean, we were doing these, pumping them out every 7 days.
Well, and to think that this was just the 6th episode, and it was this creative. Okay, I just want to go through a few of these, and we should bring Baron in, Darren, not Baron, Baron Darren. All right. So anyway, the barbershop scene when you come in and try to talk to me in the barbershop and I'm all defensive and you talk about Dorothy Hamill and another great line. I'm please. It's something about your fantasy, pleasant if unfulfilled fantasy. I thought that was really funny. The crick in Holling's neck when he got that crick when he got the crick in his neck at the bar. I thought that was hysterical when I rewatched it. I couldn't quit laughing. That the way he did that, I thought that was hilarious. And then Holling had a great line. They're dancing cheek to cheek as we speak. And then he goes to visit Shelley, and Shelley says, "Were you spying on us?" when they're dancing right in front of him, like right in front of him in his bar. And she says, "Were you spying on us?" And very simply, and I think this is what's interesting, the way John Cullum delivered it. He wasn't sarcastic. She goes, because she was right there in front of his bar. And she says, "Were you spying on us?" And he says, "In my bar? No." But he didn't say it sarcastically. He just delivered it beautifully.
No,
anyway,
he had this sweet quality about him always.
Yeah. Okay. But okay, 2 more quick lines. I won't do them all. Well, the music was pretty great. But you might be dying, but you're gone, Maggie says to Rick at the end. That was another great line. And I love Shelley's line to Holling, "You flipped your last flop on me, Holling." Which I thought was really good. And she says at the end, which I cried, "Half your age. He may be half your age, but he's half the man you are." I thought that was really beautiful. Anyway, the lighting was great, and the ending with Marilyn was great, and the Woody Allen was great. So there you go. Those are my little notes.
Well, let's, without further ado, get young Darren Burrows in here.
We're so excited. Darren, I was thinking about Darren this morning, how his character was the innocence, and I don't think his character ever had a girlfriend. So we're going to talk about this, and we're bringing in the exceptional, the amazing, the so talented, and also a beautiful heart, Darren Burrows, everybody. Woo! Welcome, Darren.
It's all downhill from that introduction.
How you doing, Darren?
I was just going to say, sitting here listening to you two before I came on, boy, you guys really work well together. I can see why they cast you both together.
Figure.
You're really good in the show, which I just watched this morning, so I'm fresh off that. But and then to see you two now, it's like a fine wine. It's the same, but it's matured. It's really great to see the back and forth and the
well, thanks.
The tennis there. Yeah, you guys are both terrific.
I got to spend some time with Darren a couple months ago in Monaco with Cynthia. We were at what was a Comic-Con thing where we were meeting fans and signing autographs, and it was so nice because I hadn't seen Darren in ages, and I was so happy to see the life you've created. You've really created a really wonderful life, and you just seem like you're in a great place. And I just want to say before we get launched into the show is, Darren is an incredible jeweler. He makes beautiful jewelry.
I didn't know that.
Oh, you got to go to his site. He actually had a post today of a ring that he made. If
no way. What's the site?
Go to his Instagram.
I'm going right now.
Go to his Instagram page. But it is beautiful, and he's such an artist and craftsman, and all the pieces are really distinct and unique. So anyone looking for gifts, check out his stuff because it's really beautiful.
No, Darren, I'll give you a call. I want to create some things with you for. Are you real Darren Burrows?
Yeah.
Is that you?
Yeah.
Real?
That's me.
Okay. I can't. Oh my gosh, you're making jewelry. I didn't know that.
Oh yeah.
It's beautiful. Look at that.
Well, like Rob's got his music. We all have to do different things. I think, it's funny. I think Corbett said it once great one time that, that's the thing about being an actor is that's not like a musician or anything else. You don't get together with your friends and like, hey, let's run this scene. Let's do a jam at least.
Right.
It's not like musicians or other art where you and it takes, as you both know, less now, but so many people to make a production that it's just so hard to have an outlet.
How did you start making jewelry?
Actually, for my birthday, quite a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, Melinda got me an engraving class because I've always been into motorcycles and stuff. And she thought I'd have fun, maybe, taking the class and engraving motorcycle parts or something like that. And I really enjoyed it. And I started doing knives and guns and got into fine jewelry and just as kind of I guess it's kind of addictive. I just really fell hard for it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, every Christmas present I'm doing from now on is going to be from you.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. You'll find a lot of good stuff. Plus, you get the Northern Exposure discount, I think. We get the Northern Exposure discount.
Maybe not. Well, Darren, talk to us about, and I relate to being creative. I think we've all done our thing. I launched a foundation. I've written 5 books, and I've written a Broadway musical. And it's well, I think as creative people, we just have to keep it going. And you and I, are kind of out on our ranches and removed ourselves from Hollywood and you raised your kids. You have 4, and I raised my daughter, and so I had to just keep myself busy. I directed a little short film and things of that nature. But acting is just part of who we are, and I think that's what's interesting. Rob, you've got your band, and Rob did what do you call it? What do you call it for my book?
Just
my poetry.
Like a blurb. Yeah,
you could relate to my poetry because do you write your own songs, Rob?
I do write my own songs, and speaking to what you guys are saying, it's like. I have this innate need to create. I just have to do it. And so if I'm not getting hired or I have to negotiate or beg for a part or get a part or produce, I produce a lot. And so if I'm not doing that, I have to do something. So pretty much every day I'm either doing music or I'm writing. I'm really into writing these days because I can do it myself. And I think to your point and Darren's point is like, and Corbett's point is we've got to. This is what we do. So one way or another, if it's not coming from the outside, it's got to come from the inside.
Yeah, amen to that. And so, okay, I can't wait to order the jewelry. And there's something about living in the country too. Just going, every time I walk outside, it grounds me. I had Easter with my neighbor, my ranch neighbor, and her family. And he says, I walk out every day and put my feet in the earth, to ground myself. And I thought, well, that's kind of what I do, walking outside and seeing the birds and the trees and all that. And we need to move on to the show. But Darren, do you relate to that? Because you live on a ranch, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah, we Melinda and I raise registered red Dexter cattle, and we've got some ducks and chickens, and usually I got a couple pigs out back for bacon seeds, and we got some guineas, 5 cats, 5 dogs. I got a whole fort of God's creatures.
And where are you? Are you in Missouri?
Yeah, in the Ozarks. Yeah, in Missouri. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Okay, well, let's talk about the show. Darren, what we love to ask everybody, we kind of have this kind of flow, is tell us about your start in the show, and then we also want to talk about the show. And I just thought right out of the gate, you were brilliant. The way that scene in the car where that music's playing and you pick up Fleischman and you leave him there, you leave him in the middle of nowhere, and you had that line about St. Elsewhere and all. You were just right. And I remember the reading with you too. And so we've talked about that, but talk about where were you as an actor? Where were you living? Because we were, Rob and I and John, who else? Some of us were in New York. Rob and I were in New York for sure. Where were you living? And tell us about your genesis as an actor.
I was in Los Angeles, and I was actually, I was working a lot back then. I'd done Casualties of War with Brian De Palma, and just finished doing Cry Baby with John Waters and, of course, Johnny Depp, and reoccurring TV series and different films. So I was working. I was at there's ups and downs, and I was at an up moment at that point, and when I got cast for this part.
And your father was an actor.
That's right. Yeah. My father was an actor. And that's kind of an interesting thing is, the way life works is I never really thought about being an actor. I came out to meet my father because I'd never known him growing up and found him in LA. And he's one of these people who wanted to be an actor since his 3rd grade play. And he was being an actor. And I really had nothing to talk to him about after we met, and so I took acting classes so that I would have something to relate to him about, and so yeah, just kind of
Amazing.
slipped into it. And a funny story, when we were on and so this, then when the show got so hot and we all started getting famous and this and that, I had a lot of questioning because I don't think that was ever really the goal for me. And the question, like, where was I and what was I doing and what was happening? And I used to hang out with the Teamsters out by our trailers and stuff. And I was talking to one of them, and I said to him, and I kind of said the shortest thing. I just said, I never really wanted to be an actor. I just kind of ended up that way. And he said, oh, yeah, that's how I became a truck driver. And I thought, yeah, it's really as simple as that we all make decisions and they lead to certain points and here we are. So, yeah, that's how I ended up on the show.
What was the audition process like for getting the show? Did you like the script? Did you want it? Did you care? Or was it just another audition and you were just whatever happened?
Oh, no, I really liked the script. I really liked the pilot and the character. And I came in and read for Megan Brennan. And I had a lot of meetings, I think, then.
She was the casting director at Universal who ultimately, she signed off on all of us being cast.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
thank you,
and
Megan.
So I came in and read for her. And then she brought me back for the casting department at Universal. And I can't remember, but I had like 3 or 4 meetings before I finally went to CBS. And then we were all there with one other alternative person for each part.
How old were you, Darren?
23, I think. 23 or 24.
Do you remember the actor who was up for it with you? No, because Corbett remembers him. It's funny.
Really? Well, they were running around together up and down the fire escapes and the in and out emergency things. And I just thought, what a couple nutballs. That, I was trying to be focused and remember what I'm supposed to be there for. And they were running around like crazy. And so, yeah, I do remember that, but no.
Who's they? Who's they?
John and
Corbett
Greg,
and
the guy who was
the other two guys
from White Lotus.
Well, okay, so let's talk about your character a little bit. The innocence and the way you would walk into rooms without knocking, and Fleischman was always like, knock or so. Just like Marilyn was always saying, you have a call on line 1, and Fleischman would always say, I only have one line.
That kind of became a running thing. I don't know at what point it was in that particular episode, but that was so funny that even though I knew it was coming, I still literally laughed. LOL'd. I laughed out loud, as the people say today. Yeah,
LOL. You laughed out loud.
Yeah, it became a running gag. It had already been established in an earlier episode, but they milked that for a long time. Every time she'd say
good,
line
and you
1,
delivered it fresh.
We only have one line.
That
was very funny.
Well, talk about your character and your approach to your character and even this episode. I think this episode, Sex, Lies, and Ed's Tape, really established, this kind of artistic side of, this is what I've talked about it a lot. I'm going to talk about it again. It was the dichotomy, the yin and yang, the complexity to every character. And here you were, this simple, young kid, so to speak, right, in Sicily, Alaska, but you had all this knowledge about Woody Allen and you knew all of his movies, but you didn't know, what was it, Crime and Punishment, I guess, right? Or whatever it was. But talk about the innocent
Crimes and Misdemeanors.
Based off probably Crimes and Misdemeanors by Dostoevsky. But
based on Crimes and Punishment by Dostoevsky.
What'd I say? Crimes and Misdemeanors?
You just flip them around. But anyway, the point is clear. Well, Crimes and Misdemeanors may have been based on Crimes and Punishment by Dostoevsky.
Oh, right. Crimes and Punishment. That, by the way, is my all-time favorite book, Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. I love that book. I have a hardback Audition dated from like the 1800s. I love it so much.
God, amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool. But Darren, your character was so innocent. Did Ed ever have a girlfriend?
I think he did a couple of times, but that was like, a big deal and didn't work out or something.
I don't even really remember that. Do you remember?
Yeah, he did. He did, absolutely. In the later seasons, he had. In the 6th season, he definitely did. And there were occasional dates. But I think, Darren, I remember. First of all, Darren and I started hanging out right away. We would go downtown Pioneer Square and roam around, and I felt kind of protective of him, even though I was only a minute older than him, I think. But somehow, we just bonded right away. And but I remember you struggling. I remember talking to you about you hadn't quite in your mind. I mean, I agree with Janine from the get-go. It was clear who Ed was and what you were doing. But I think in your mind, you hadn't quite found the character. It took you a little while to find Ed. Is that true, or am I misremembering?
I think the pilot was hard for me to get through because Josh Brand had specific ideas about probably all the characters, but my character that I don't know if I don't know. I didn't meet him till the end of the casting process, and we had not really spoken until we showed up to shoot. And so I think that might have, I mean, there may have been some adjustment, but I think that whatever that was in the way, or that may have been in the way, evaporated. And
what kind of notes did he give you? Because I know that my notes were things like "don't smile." You know what I mean? They were like, your chemistry with Rob is already there. Don't play it. It's a comedy. Write it down. I mean, I think those were kind of the three messages, because I'm much more effusive, vivacious, I think, than Maggie is. What were the notes that they gave you for the character when they were creating the character? What kind of notes did Josh give you? I'm really interested about that.
Yeah, he really helped me find the character in that. He said, it's not written anywhere, but I wrote Ed, and I'm going to tell you the way I want this played is Ed has 146 IQ. He's a genius, and he may not know it, and he may not have the education, but Ed has 146 IQ, and he looks at everything differently. So whatever that means to you, he said, take that and go with that. And so I think I did. I think I did just start looking at every scene and the characters and the things going on around me as Ed, looking at them as a brand new, fresh thing without any kind of preconceived notions or ideas about what they meant. Like to oversimplify what it means to hit your thumb with a hammer, just to hit your thumb with a hammer and feel that. And I think I tried to approach Ed in that way, in a way of innocence of experiencing everything for the first time without a judgment on it.
And that speaks to something Janine was brought up a couple episodes ago, I think when we had John Corbett on, who's had great things to say about you. But there was a moment where you're filming, what was it, Janine? He was filming Barry. Oh, yeah, you got a film crew showed up, and you kind of glommed onto them, and you were trying to find out how they did what they did. And by the end of the episode, you were shooting. You had the camera on your shoulder, and you're supposed to be interviewing Barry Maurice, and he's talking about something, and he's just kind of long-winded, spewing one of his monologues, and the camera, as your point of view, the camera just drifts off and starts shooting like the bird the taxidermy bird that's on the wall and the jukebox, and it's like you're not even, which speaks to the genius. It's like he wasn't interested in what was obvious. It was always kind of looking in some different way.
Yeah, I remember that. And of course, the funny thing is of course I think that was probably Jim Heyman shooting my camera drifting off like that.
But it was in the writing, like what you're saying, because Josh, right, yeah.
No, but I mean, like, it's just interesting. Like, I was struck, I haven't seen this episode in so long that when I was watching it, Ed has all these great imaginations, like you touched on earlier with the Indiana Jones and the Midnight Cowboy bit, which is terrific. And, but Ed, I'm not really doing anything. It's through my eyes. It's in my head. So it's like a POV. It's like the amount of time I'm not, you see me drift off in that scene, and then the rest of it's actually you and Corbett doing the whole scene, and somehow it's tied back to me, but it's not really me in the scene. And so much of Ed was like that. I think the best part of playing Ed was somehow I was the punchline. My dialogue was the punchline. Like I felt bad for you. You would have well, not bad for you, but just like an appreciation for the amount of work you had to put in with the amount of dialogue that you have to memorize and technical terms and scientific terms and, concepts, understanding these medical concepts and everything like that. And then I would have the one-liner punchline. And so
Right.
it was like so easy to be, it was so easy to be at on that level because you and the rest of the cast, always, whoever I was doing the scene with, always set me up so beautifully that, there's a certain guilty pleasure in that.
I was jealous of it. I remember, and I'd have to go home and learn those lines, and then you'd have a couple great killers, and that would be the fun. That'd be the part people would remember.
Yeah.
Rob, I don't know if Rob and Darren, I don't know if you know this, but I ended up playing a doctor on television myself.
I do know this on Strong Medicine.
Yeah. And oh my God, I had paragraphs of medical that I had to remember. And because they wanted to sort of teach people about the disease of the week. And I'd say, guys, no, doctors don't speak. Doctors usually don't talk. I mean, no one talks like this. So I could appreciate, Rob, what you were doing in this episode, especially I was really watching your work when you're, talking to Shelley and you're listening to her chest and then you're listening to her stomach and I could appreciate all the things that you had to do that you did so well all the time. And you
one
made
of
all
the
that
things,
dialogue look seamless.
One of the things I insisted on early on, and I think it even became a contractual thing at a point, was that whenever I had to touch someone in a medical sense, there had to be a technical advisor. And so we would have doctors there because I just was determined to make it look authentic. But I do remember going home and trying to learn that stuff. And it was not easy. It wasn't fun, but the specificity is what makes something great. And there were so much specific things. Darren, did you base your character on someone, or is it just imagination?
No. Yeah. I just, for me, Ed's the best of me. So Ed,
that's a great thing to say.
Of all of us. That he's the best of me without any of the other stuff that's not the best. So everybody always got the benefit of a doubt. I tried to read every line to verbalize it in that way of the best possible reading of that line. Not performance-wise, but positivity. And so, I think, Ed always tried to, I try to see the best in everybody. And I think, and that's something you can do even if you're reading the phone book, you can read, so that's, I think a lot of the lines in the beginning kind of were read in ways that were unexpected. But of course, the benefit of that was by the time I would get a call from down south, of course, we didn't have the internet or anything back then. And it would be days later and we were shooting on film and it was too late to do anything about it. So it was like, in the future, if there's a question about a way a line should be delivered, please call us ahead of time. But as it evolved and the shows evolved, they started writing more to that and it became easier. Yeah.
I think that was one of the frustrations for us is that our creators were in California and we were in Washington State and they weren't there when we filmed. But
I didn't find that frustrating. I find that liberating.
Yes, it was liberating, but as Darren is referring to, it became irritating and demoralizing later in post-production when they came in and said, well, we really wanted you to say the line this way. And,
right.
We didn't want you to have any emotion when Rick died when he was hit by a satellite. And what were you doing crying? It's a comedy. Write it down. So they would cut off my face and then make me in post-production and looping, recreate all my lines and redo all my lines happily, And so that was the frustration. I think, Darren, that's kind of what you were saying. They would call you 3 or 4 days later and say, well, really, we wanted the line delivered this way. And I found that to be very frustrating sometimes.
And then the hours, I mean, you brought it up, but the hours in the looping studio or soundstage to try to, fix fix what we've done.
Let's explain that a little to the audience again, just so they understand. Probably most people do at this point, but ADR, additional dialogue recorded, also known as looping, is something you do after you've shot a scene and they've edited it and they want to, sometimes you have to replace a line that you've said because there's a sound technical problem, and sometimes there's a creative reason, like what Janine's talking about. So, in the early years, especially with Northern Exposure, they were very controlling about how they wanted things done. And they also were, and I thought it was, I can see it even when I watch the shows now, is sometimes they didn't want any dead air. They were very scared of dead air. And so they would edit the shot so that if you hadn't said anything, they would then have you add lines to what you said on camera in post-production and looping sessions. And each of us would go in for, multiple hours. I think maybe even, is it possible for
8,
3 or 4 hours?
7.
Right. Long hours in this
Not
in these
normal.
room.
Not normal.
And as an actor, it's very hard to recreate, the state you were in and or change it, in a dry, antiseptic room with a microphone,
Well
2
said.
months later. So they were, I think they hurt. I mean, look, the show was a hit, so what do I know? But I think they hurt scenes sometimes because they were so scared of quiet, or they made someone change a line. And even if it didn't work, they didn't care because they got what they wanted, and I'd be like, well, if you can tell that she's not saying that or he's not saying that, but they didn't care.
Well, and also I think once you're in, Darren, I'd like to hear what you have to think about this, say about this, but once, as you say, Rob, when you're in the snow and you're out in Roslyn, Washington, which is where we filmed, and you're freezing cold, and it's 10 o'clock at night, and you've got this emotional scene, and you bring all this emotion to it and all these layers to it, and you deliver the line, and then they want you to go do it again, a month or 6 weeks later in a dry room. It's very hard to get those little idiosyncrasies of the cracks in your voice, or the little depths or variations in your voice. And in my opinion, that's what makes acting wonderful. And it was very hard to recreate that, Darren, don't you think?
Oh yeah, I think so. And then justified or unjustified, I personally would experience a certain amount of frustration where if it's so important, why can't there be someone on the set when I'm doing it the first time to tell me that I'm going in the wrong direction, rather than, change the emotion in your voice, but your lips have to match the way you say the words so that everything matches.
Right.
And there was even a couple, I remember a couple scenes where they would cut away from me. I'm not remembering the specific things, but I remember the moment of the emotional moment in the looping room where they're cut to the other actor so that they can add a line that you didn't say, so that to change the tone of the scene in a way that they felt whoever they wasn't there. And so I remember Martin Brucey was a lifesaver, and so trying to play diplomat in so many of those sessions. And that would be the other frustration was because, as I'm sure both of you remember, we're working 6 days a week in the beginning, shooting many long hours, that the looping sessions would be at odd hours, and there would be nobody in the office down south. And so Martin would be saying, well, this is the note, and this is what they want, and this is, let's give them one. And I'm like, but I don't understand. This doesn't make any sense to me. I thought it worked perfect. Let me talk to someone. Oh, well, there's no one to talk to. Just give me one. I said, no, I'm not just going to give you one. Then it'll get used, and I don't understand what I'm doing. And
then there was a negotiation. You're right. You would negotiate for how many lines you would do. I'll do one here, but I'm not going to say that one.
Exactly.
Which made you realize that it was all arbitrary, or a lot of it was arbitrary. It wasn't necessary, because they didn't need it,
Well, it was just frustrating. Like, I think we talked about that the other day, and I have a funny story about Martin coming to Italy when I was filming Cliffhanger.
Oh, that's right.
He flew to Rome to our Cortina.
Well, tell who Martin Bruce Lee is first, and then
Martin
tell
Bruce
that
Lee is
story.
one of our associate producers or co-producers of the show, and he was in charge of the music and of looping. And he was a lovely person, and he really understood our angst with this process. And but he flew to Cortina, Italy, where I was filming Cliffhanger, and I had to go, story. And he wanted all these lines, and I'm like, no, I don't think so. He's like, I just flew from Italy. I'm like, I just flew from the States. I'm like, yeah.
Which is wild because nowadays you could do it from a hotel room,
I know.
Right.
But I was like, yeah, I don't know. I'll give you this one, but I'm not going to give you that one. And he's like, I have to go back with a very few lines, and I flew to Italy. I'm like, well, sorry. You know what I mean? But it was
because by then we had a little more autonomy over our work. It wasn't just we weren't just serving someone else. We were all in it together, and so our ideas would have to be listened to, which was nice when the show became that.
That's the fine line, don't you think, Darren and Rob? That's the fine line between. And boy, I tell you what, I don't know about y'all, but I've been guest stars since Northern Exposure on hit television series, and I've watched those actors, man, who've been there for 5 years or whatever, just annihilate the directors. Just annihilate them. And I'm sitting, and they're making like $500,000 an episode, and I sit back and I'm like, oh, I'm just going to observe this because this is really interesting to watch. But it's quite challenging, I think, to try to recreate the work. But it's that fine line between. We talked about this, Rob, earlier, and Darren, I'd love to hear what you think, between wanting to please the director, wanting to be a team player, wanting to please the producers who are the gods that created us, and holding on to our own sense of integrity as actors. And I think that was the big struggle that I think, Rob, you and I had all the time. And Darren, what are your thoughts about that? Because it's a fine line, because you don't want to be difficult. You want to be able to give them what you want, but the minute you do that, that's what they'll use, and anything you want to bring to the character won't be used. But what are your thoughts, Darren, about that kind of complexity of trying to be a team player?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I'm sure I'm sure it cut both ways. I'm sure there was a certain amount of frustration down south with not being able to, for whatever reason, not being able to be there and be more in control of the situation, and always trying to play catch up. And I think so many of the notes came because of the distance, came through intermediaries, so that it wasn't really a person who could make a decision. So there was not a conversation to be had about these things. And I found that when there was a conversation to be had, like when you would actually, talk to Andrew Schneider, one of our executive producers, or talk to Josh or John, that the conversation went very well. And you arrived at an amicable solution to whatever the question was very quickly. But so many times there was no one to have a conversation with. And I think that led to like, okay, well, if I'm not going to talk to me, I'm going to have to do what I think is right here. And then there would be, some possible friction with that.
But I do think, saying all these things that were kind of behind the scenes frustrations for us, the show was still so good. And it just made my day to go watch the show this morning. I watched it this morning, and it just took me away. And Darren, what are your thoughts about this particular episode? The creativity involved, and all those all the different storylines that were interwoven together, and just the way you felt so good at the end. At the end when they brought in, Marilyn to do her dance, and to see all that, and how Fleischman was like, wait, this is what a powwow is? I didn't know what this was. A powwow is. And I'm like, oh, Fleischman. And it's like kind of like everybody had something different to say, and how they were all singing "This Land Is My Land," at the beginning. And then you bring out the comedian, and then you have Marilyn. But it was so touching to see her do that, and it brought back the whole historical element of Alaska and the Native Americans, and the blend of all the different storylines. I thought it was so refreshing.
And also, I think that what's interesting about that moment you're referring to about Fleischman, kind of thinking, what is this powwow? But then when he walks out and he sees Marilyn, come out and do her dance and take it so seriously and be so connected to her heritage, which Elaine was as well. And I think I vaguely remember her being very kind of involved in how that was going to be represented and how it was going to be done, and very particular about what she was going to wear and what her dance was. And she was so into it. And Joel sees that. And I think it's a great moment for Joel and all the characters in the show, the way they kind of get off themselves and have some kind of turn. And it made me think, Darren, do you have any Native in you? Because Ed was Native, right? Obviously. Do you have any Native American in your ancestry?
No, I don't have any Native American in me. And
you're blonde. You're blonde.
Yeah, I am blonde, and yeah. So no. In fact, they had called me. They actually called me for the part. Ed was originally written as a full-blooded Native American, and then so it was at the point where I think when they went with him half and half, and that became a big part of his 1 foot in one camp and 1 foot in the other of and being an orphan and like that. That then I went in for the part.
Did you end up doing research or hanging out and learning about Native culture, and did it change? Did it change you in at all? You know, the way you.
I did with the a lot of the extras and the background actors, and I was invited. I think like a number of us were. I went to a SWAT and was introduced to it at that point. And I learned so much. And really was brought in as to some very intimate, I guess, situations. But I deliberately didn't play Ed that way. For me, Ed is just like anybody else who's born, and he's and a child. So I didn't want to make it like different because he's part Native American, and that means something any more than if he's part Irish or part German or anything like that. I thought I'm just going to stay away from all of that. He's written as is. He's written as an orphan who's his world is the world of cinema, and which I just as an aside, I thought that was funny, that line where he hasn't seen the latest Woody Allen movie because it's not out on video cassette yet. He's a year behind the world, being up north there, but it hasn't come out on video.
Yeah, and I think it would be interesting to talk too about. I'm continually struck by the way we were always moving in our scenes. There was such movement, and that scene between you, Darren, and Rob. At the end, when you're talking about, I don't think I can be, a Steven Spielberg, and you talk about how well Woody Allen wrote about what he knew, but it was what I learned on Northern Exposure was there was no, and I liked this actually, whether it was the except at appropriate times, but whether it was nature or walk and talks or whatever, but there was movement in that scene. Rob was cooking the dinner. Rob was putting the eggs on the plate. Rob was putting the sausage on the plate. And then y'all sat down and you started talking, but then Rob Fleischman got up and went to the refrigerator and got milk, and then he poured milk. And I love that. I love that there's this movement in all of the scenes from a directorial standpoint, that because I went off and did other series and I would just have to sit there and it was just like a dialogue back and forth. I'm like, wait. And I really appreciated the way Northern Exposure and the way they directed it. It was just so real, and there was movement.
I agree.
I loved just watching you cook in the kitchen and the reality of that scene between the two of you.
There was all kinds of, and I kind of took that with me going on to all my other shows. As a director, as an actor, because it feels like life. And you're right. A lot of shows you watch, and they just stand there, and the actors don't even want to move. They're happy to not. But I thought, and it was hard, learning that blocking while you had to deliver the lines and cook food and do all that. It looks so simple, but it takes a lot to get it right, so that you pour the eggs, because you have to pour them on the same line every take, when they cut to different angles and stuff. But I want to just, while we're talking about this, I want to just throw out to Sandy Smolin, who directed the episode. And I don't know, I think he came back again for another one.
He came back for the big kiss.
The big kiss. When was that?
It was like in the second season, right?
So
Right
he
at the
came back
beginning
for
of
a
the second
couple
season.
episodes, and he was a great director. His wife was a really lovely actress named Pam Reed, who I knew from New York. And so anyway, I thought he did such a lovely job. They all did. You know, so many of our directors. It was very rare that I think, unless you guys want to differ, that we had a director that didn't work. You know, some of them we didn't get along with as well, or you could argue over a moment or something. But it was very rare that they didn't make the show better from what was on the page by creating all this blocking and physical activity for us to do. It's hard to work that out, you know, because the director thinks it up in their head, and then they come on the set and the actor's like, well, I don't want to go there. I don't feel like I should. And so finding
that's part of the process that I think would be interesting for people to understand. We would arrive at I was always there at 5 a.m. or very early to do makeup. And then they pull you out of the makeup trailer, and you walk into wherever we are, whether it's outdoors in Roslyn, Washington, in the snow, or whether it was in the soundstage, and we have no makeup on, or I didn't have curlers at the time because I didn't have enough hair. But you hold on, you have your sides, and we work with the director about what kind of blocking we want to have. And they would come with their preconceived notions, but a great director is a director that compromises. And that's what I've really learned about just compromising in life. You know, it's like the creative process, because he might say, well, I really see that you're sitting there and sitting here. And then Rob, I remember so many times Rob's like, that's too close together, you know? It's like, what? That's not natural.
But you know, it's funny you say that, Janine, because I noticed that the scene with you and Rick in my office, you guys, the chairs are so close together, and I'm like, nobody would ever sit like that. Like,
but in a doctor's office you might, but they were trying to get us in a two shot. They were trying to get us in a two shot. I'm not saying what you were saying was wrong. I'm not saying what you're saying was wrong. I'm just saying that was part of the process, where a good director would be one who would come in, but we had a say in that. We had a say in, like, well, what if I get the milk on this line? It feels more natural to me to get up on this line than on that line. It was a real collaboration. Darren, what are your thoughts about that? You know, the blocking aspect.
I think so, and I think especially once the show was set after the first season, I think a lot of weight came upon Jim Heyman and Jim Charleston, whoever, and our different first ADs to not let the directors get too far off track, to maintain that kind of shooting style and aspect and the way we shot, which is, we were always trying to get film type shots on an episodic show, and which led to the 6 working days. I think did we even have any interior set up on the first season? I mean, so much of the stuff was exterior, like you would shoot a film, and just took so much work.
It's true. That's a great point. Because I think what the DP and the AD become the constant when you have different directors coming out. So that's a great thing. We haven't talked about that yet, that they have to maintain the consistency, the aesthetics, and the conventions that have been established for the show. Like, for instance, it was a rule, for whatever reason, on Northern Exposure, you couldn't rack focus. Rack focus means someone's in the foreground and someone's in the background, and then you turn the focus so that they're in focus. Like, they didn't want that look. It's a film look, but they didn't want it. I don't know why. And so if a director would come on and do that, the DP would have to say, you can't do that. And sometimes there'd be tension between the director and the DP, because the DP knew that the guys in LA would back him up, and so there was a tension.
I like that. Yeah, that's a really good point, Darren. And I like the fact that there wasn't a lot of that modern quality. What I noticed about when I watched the episode today is there was movement. There was organic movement amongst the actors and the way we moved, and the camera would kind of follow that. I love that. I do not like the modern style, which is the, handheld cameras that go like this, and the cameras go this way and this way and this way and this way, and they go back and forth on the actors. And it takes me out of the scene, because suddenly I'm like, oh my God, I'm dizzy. It's all about, it's like the camera, it's all about the camera, and you can feel the camera moving here and the camera moving there. But we had that kind of organic movement that didn't take you out of the reality of the story, fantasy, utopia, beautiful place in Northern Exposure was. I never felt like the camera work was distracting. And I think today, with all these modern things they do, it's just so distracting. It's about the camera is moving instead of really what's happening with the actors. We moved in Northern Exposure.
It's interesting you say that because the reality is we had so much dolly work. We actually had so much camera movement. In fact, this Sex Lies and Ed's tape, there's a thing where I'm sitting at the bar and I'm sitting on the dolly, and the dolly starts tracking back, and I'm on it, and the back foreground shifts to the background. Almost like what you're talking about without the racking focus, because I stay in focus the whole time, but the camera's moving and I'm on the camera. And down Hollings Bar, and it's an interesting.
But but the dolly work, I remember the dolly work too, Darren. Now that you bring that up, the people who move, we should explain what a dolly is. But the dolly work was at least organic. It had been in Hollywood forever.
I'm just saying it was so natural and so organic that it wasn't like what you're talking about.
It was a classic, a classic aesthetic for the show. It was very classic, and a dolly.
Explain what a dolly
is a cart on wheels with the cameras attached to, and it's used to move in and out of different positions in the scene. So you can have it on the floor, although the floor has to be really super smooth, and you can move around and wherever the actors go. Or as we did on Northern Exposure, which was a convention of movies, as Darren said, we would have 200 feet of dolly track in the street in Roslyn where we were shooting, and these guys would have to push this heavy dolly along as say Janine and I would be walking along as in a walk and talk, they call it, chatting. And if one of us messed up a line, they'd have to bring the thing back to one. They'd say back to one, and you could see our pal JC, the dolly grip for the JC would roll his eyes and think, oh my God, these actors, if they don't, because it was 100 degrees and they were sweating, and we had to do a take after take.
But that's another thing. We had an opportunity to have a lot of takes. We would do 7, 8, 9 takes per shot. And today it's like throw the moving camera that's going to go back and forth. Who cares about lights? We're going to light and post, which I hate. We're going to light and post. It doesn't matter to have any nuances of lighting on you right now, because we're just going to, and when they bring it up in post though, they have to bring it up on everybody, and it looks flat and horrible in my opinion. But it's like that whole organic aspect is missing when they just kind of go back and forth really quickly, and we don't have that opportunity to, but also it's like 1 or 2 takes. The acting these days, and at least in the work I've done, it's like you get 1 or 2 takes and we're moving on. Whereas we really did have time to massage our performances and find our performances. And not only that, in editing, I really appreciate in retrospect the way that the show doesn't feel slow. Like if you watch a lot of 1980s movies, they feel sort of slow, right? Like this, but Northern Exposure doesn't feel slow. It still feels modern. Even though we took our time, and the camera actually will stay on our faces for a lengthy period of time, which doesn't happen now.
They packed a lot of story into every episode. I mean, watching that episode, Sex, Lies, and Ed's tapes last night, it's like there's a lot of story going on. There's a lot of production value and a lot of story. It's a real testament to all involved. Darren, is there any memories or anything that when you were thinking about this that you want to share, like anything about the show that comes back to mind that we haven't touched on yet? Because we have to, I think we'll wind it up pretty soon.
Because you've got that great show with Peg Phillips.
My favorite moment in the whole 110 episodes is one where Darren is dancing with Ruth Ann up on a mountain cliff. But we'll talk about that, and
those are the days when you had crane shots. Now they just use drones. Back then we had cranes.
No, that was a helicopter.
Was that a helicopter shot?
Oh yeah,
Well, anyway, it's cranes and helicopters.
What came back to me is just how much I loved making the show, and I mean, a lot of it's so much like, as they say, making sausage, but and so you want to tell people things that they don't know, but basically, I think that we all loved it. So I know I loved it, and I know you both of you loved it, and I think we all loved it. Making the show, and you care a lot about things you make, and so I think all that only made it better. I think a lot of it comes across, to me, when you watch the show and you see the people and you see how much they care about what they're doing, just subconsciously and subliminally, I think that really comes across. That it's as a caring show, and you want to watch the people because they care, and so you care. at least me, I'm watching the characters, and both of you, and Holling and Cynthia and everybody, and Barry, who's hilarious, of course, and. And that's my favorite thing. Really, any of the characters could be doing anything, and I would like to watch it. And I always did like watching it, and watch like let me watch. I didn't watch the dailies, but I'd watch the episode every week just to see what you had done, and because you're not able to see when you're shooting your stuff, what everybody else is doing. And that's what came back to me watching this episode.
Mm-hmm. And it was once a week. I mean, it wasn't people, but since it was once a week, I don't know if y'all remember, I came home after our first season, I guess, because look what they packed into the first season and how original and creative it was. And people would literally get on KVIL, here in DFW, and they'd be talking about the show and the water cooler conversation. Like, did you see what happened last week? And can you believe this happened? Whatever. I wonder what's going to happen next week. And there is something about that old fashioned way of just savoring a show, waiting a week and being excited about next Monday because that's what happened. People were just all abuzz about what it was, because it was just incredibly original.
I just want to say, Darren, it's so great to see what you've created for yourself, and, listening to you and talking to you, you have this kind of down home wisdom that's really, really cool. And I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you in the way that I said at the beginning that I somehow felt kind of protective of you. I don't know why, but like to see that you've learned a lot, and you have a lot of wisdom to offer. And so I appreciate you coming on the show. And as Janine said, we definitely hope you'll come back, and we'll try to time it for for some episode that you had a big storyline in. But this has been, it's nice. It's such a nice trip down memory lane getting to chat with you guys. So thank you both.
Well, and the feeling's mutual, and so great to see both of you again. And thanks for thinking of me, and thanks for having me on. And anytime you want to have me back, I'll be back.
Cool. Darren, it's wonderful watching you. I just get a big smile on my face, even from the pilot on, of the work you did, and the simplicity, the complex yet simplicity, and the good heart and the humor, everything you packed into one. You were just absolutely special on the show, and you're a special person. So,
hey, how about that wardrobe, you guys?
Yeah.
What's that?
The wardrobe.
Yeah.
What about
the wardrobe
on
the show?
Yeah.
The wardrobe on the show.
How great it was?
How everybody was dressed,
right.
How we all dressed back then was just like, I hadn't seen it in so long. I just, that jumped out at me,
See, but I think the wardrobe doesn't look dated. Like, I feel like a lot of it is like, you could wear it now. Like, maybe some of the collar sizes and stuff like that, but like jeans and flannel shirts are still being worn.
Well, not only that, they refuse to let anything be modern. So no one ever, you hear about these big stars on other shows. They're sent gifts. They're sent, a certain kind of shoes or clothes or cosmetic or whatever. We didn't get anything. At least I didn't. You know what I mean?
I got tons of stuff.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, great. I didn't get anything. Nobody sent me anything. And it's like because they did not want us to be hip. The minute, Rob, you tried to bring in a cool little hip Hollywood, Fred Siegel hat, they were like, no, none of that. We had to stay organic. Like we didn't have guest stars, Barbara Streisand, whoever wanted to come on the show. And I'm not saying she did, but if we had a big star that wanted to come on, nope. They wanted to keep it very, very real.
Do you know how hard I had to fight to start wearing sunglasses? I don't remember what season they finally, just to shut me up probably, because it was like, I was like, we're out in the bush, we're out in the woods, the sun is glaring, any normal human being would put on sunglasses. Like, it's not like, and finally, it took a long time for television in general to let actors wear sunglasses, but
they didn't want us to be hip. There was no hip. And
Right.
I'm glad they did that, actually. Yeah, those high-waisted jeans they made me wear were not very flattering. I think I think finally about the third season, I was able to ask for some side zip pants that looked a little more flattering and those Sorel boots. But yeah. And we talked last week about Cynthia. I looked at her earrings, that our wardrobe, Catherine, mistress, the wardrobe, what is her word? Costume
Catherine
designer.
Bentley. Yeah.
Kathleen Bentley. She would even design the little earrings that Cynthia would wear to kind of correspond with every scene. So I was really watching those. But yeah, well, did you not like your wardrobe, Darren? Your leather jacket?
Oh no, I liked it fine. It was just like, jumped out at me. Just and you wore the pants well, but just just like the high waisted pants and just the whole outfit, the whole outfits that everybody wore together. Just so and maybe because it was so long ago and I was there, but I just was like, wow, look how everybody's dressed.
But it was indicative, and we need to close here, but I mean, it was indicative of what I felt in Texas growing up, because I wasn't in a big city. So there was a time in the 70s and 80s when you didn't know what the fashion was going to be until you saw it. And they had already created it 6 months earlier, and then 6 months later it hit Texas, and then you're finally figuring out what the fashion is. We were always behind because there wasn't this instant gratification social media thing. It took a while for fashion to reach, and I think that was part of the charm. That way up there in Alaska, I mean, they didn't really know what the fashion was, and they also really didn't care. Yeah, which I think is great. She left Grosse Pointe, Michigan. Maggie did. She didn't want anything to do with that anymore.
So I should say, as we sign off, that next week's episode we have who's our guest?
It was John Cullum.
John
it's Kodiak,
Cullum.
Isn't it Kodiak next week?
You tell me, but
Okay, hang on, let
I
me
also
go
want to just tell the people watching or listening, most likely, you can also watch the show on YouTube on the Northern Disclosure channel. So you have the choice of watching or listening, and you can see there's these beautiful faces I'm looking at. And Darren, thanks again, and we'll be back next week with hopefully John Cullum.
Yeah, John Cullum, a Kodiak moment. I remember that was a big show for them.
Love John.
Yeah. And
We'll
Darren,
tell him you said hi.
Please come back. Please come back. And so one of the fun things we all like to say in unison, and since we're all being filmed separately, is we like to end with North to the Future. And Rob and I, so on the count of three, even though we're stepping on each other, it's going to be recorded separately. So let's all say North to the Future. You ready? North to the future. Okay. Well, next week, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next week for a Kodiak moment. And we hope to have John Cullum. If not, we're going to have a fabulous guest. And this is a real treat. It's a real treat for me, Rob and Darren, to spend time with you and to watch the show again. It's just sort of become the joy of my life. And thank all of you for listening. And next week, we'll be back. And thanks for joining us with O'Connell and Fleischman.
I think it should maybe be Fleischman O'Connell, actually.
In your dreams, Fleischman.
Northern Disclosure is a production with Evergreen Podcasts and executive produced by Paul Anderson and Scott McCarthy for Workhouse Media.